The OJ Simpson case is one of the biggest cases in American history. Dubbed the trial of the century, there are still many to this day that is divided on his guilt or innocence. Join us as we examine this case that changed the American justice system forever on this episode of True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People.
Welcome to True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People, the podcast where we bring two passions together. The show that gives new meaning to the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction, and reminding you that there is an extraordinary person in all of us. Here is your host, David McClam.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the episode of True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People. Of course, I'm your man, David McClam. Hey, if you guys haven't already, make sure you follow us on all of our social media. One link to a link tree will get you every place you need to go pertaining to the show. All right, before we jump into today's case, just a couple things to let you guys know. As you see, today I'm dropping on a different day. So going forward, because my schedule is getting busier and I'm producing other shows, and also I'm about to be on some trips here pretty soon, which you usually always hear at the end of the show, I had to switch the day in which True Crime and Authors and Extraordinary Peoples drop. So from here on out, I'm going to say that it's going to release now every Saturday. Now, this can be changed every once in a while. You may get it as early as Friday. If I have a clear schedule and can drop it early, I certainly will, because I want to get you guys these episodes as quickly as I can. But just note on your calendar for sure, going forward, True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People's new day of release will be every Saturday. A couple of weeks ago, I told you guys I've set up some things if you wanted to help support the show. The first one of those is already done now. In the show notes, you will find the link to buy me a coffee. For as low as $1 to $5, you can help support the show. And everything goes back into the show. For instance, I have a couple of trips coming up this year. One in August, going to Fayetteville, Arkansas for True Crime Fest. That money will go back into helping me get there, as well as the continuing production of the show, which includes equipment and all that kind of good stuff. So if you do love what I do here and you don't mind helping out and supporting the show a little bit, $1 to $5 over at Buy Me a Coffee, link in the show notes, will help. And I thank you guys in advance. All right, so today's case, it's one that has to be talked about right now because the iron is hot. The subject of the case has passed away. And to be honest, it's the reason why I started doing podcasting in the first place. So this week, we're going to talk about the OJ Simpson case. If you guys ever wanted to know what it was like when I started this is the first case ever. The first time I ever podcasted, my very first episode I ever did in podcasting when I was with A Day with Crime. So what we're going to do, like I told you guys before in the past, there'd be some episodes that I shot over there that I will bring here because I just can't redo them. It doesn't recapture the magic that was going on at the time that it was recorded. So that's what we're going to do here. You're going to hear the original podcast episode from A Day with Crime when we recorded this back in May 7, 2018. Again, this is the very first episode, so your boy wasn't as good at editing and things as he is now, but I did do you the favor of remastering this. So everything that you will hear is authentic to that episode shot May 7, 2018, except for it sounds a whole lot better because I know what I'm doing now and I have remastered the clip. So as always, when I do these kind of episodes, I will come back at the end. I will fill in what's going in now, and then I will also tell you where I stand on this case, if my stance is still the same as it was then, and everything that has changed with it. So again, this was recorded May 7, 2018. It is on the OJ Simpson case, as you heard the intro coming in. Hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll talk to you guys in a little bit. So OJ's name is Orenthal James Simpson. He was born on July 9th, 1947 in San Francisco, California. He was one of the greatest running backs in NFL history. He played for two teams, which is the Buffalo Bills from 67 to 77 and the San Francisco 49ers from 78 to 79. He had 11,236 rushing yards, which he did break the single season rushing record in 1973. He had 4.7 yards per carry and 61 running touchdowns, which is why they called him the Juice, because he was quick and he was fluid. So although this should be the reason why we want to remember dear brother OJ for his life and all of his accomplishments, that unfortunately is not going to be what we remember, because all that changed in 1994. So on June 12, 1994, Simpson's ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ronald Goldman were found brutally stabbed to death outside of Nicole's home in Brentwood, California. So this led to what has been dubbed the trial of the century. And after an 11-month trial, OJ was found not guilty on October 3rd, 1995. Now, Fred Goldman, who is the father of Ron Goldman, decided that he wanted to go ahead and wage a wrongful death suit because it's a civil case and not a criminal case. If you know anything about crime, now that OJ has been found not guilty, he can never be tried again under the American double jeopardy law. So Ron Goldman filed a suit against OJ on February 5th. On February 5th, he ended up winning that case to a tune of $33.5 million, which they've only gotten $500,000 of that because of the sale of Simpson's Heisman Trophy. Now, he did try to go after Simpson's pension, which is $28,000 a month from the NFL, but legally he cannot touch that, and that's why OJ still has a little bit of money. So after all that took place, Simpson was suspended by a federal judge from spending any advance money on a book and an interview that he was doing. Now, the book that you may know is called If I Did It. Originally, it was going to be called I Did It, but we'll discuss later on in the discussion why the if came into play. So on September 13, 2007, Simpson led a group of men into a room at Palace Station Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas and took sports memorabilia that he says was stolen from him. Now, you would think after all this murder stuff and you beat the rap and you got off scot-free that you would just chill out. But no, OJ could not do that. So because of that, he was charged with criminal conspiracy, kidnapping, assault, robbery, and using a deadly weapon. So on October 3rd, 2008, Simpson was found guilty on all charges. On December 5th, 2008, Simpson was sentenced to 33 years in prison. And on July 20th of 2017, the parole board granted Simpson parole. He was released on October 1st of 2017 after serving just 12 years. And this year, the OJ Simpson, the lost confession tapes did air, which is another thing that is sparking us to come back and talk about this case. So that is a little bit of a synopsis on that. So let's kick this off. So Geneva, what do you have to say about OJ? Where do you want to start this discussion at with his criminal charge, and how do you feel about it?
So these lost confession tapes, which they weren't even really lost, they were just never aired, right?
Right. It's the tapes that was pushed back because OJ was barred from talking about the book or that particular case or the interview. The interview and the book went hand in hand.
Okay, so pretty much Ron Goldman's father put this ban on this book, right? So that made it so that these confession tapes couldn't be released at all, like to be used in court.
Right, because pretty much Fred wanted OJ to be barred from any kind of money. So when he wrote this book, it was going to be money coming into his pockets. And of course, because he wrote the book, it became a hotbed for press everywhere because of the fact that they wanted to interview OJ to see if they can get more out of him. So when that suspension went on by the judge to not talk about the book, it automatically banned the release of what we now have, the lost confession tapes.
Okay, so I have a literal problem with the fact that this book and these tapes were basically made like non-admissible in court. Because if the point is, right, that OJ Simpson is guilty of murder of two people, why would you make it so that the two things that could point to his guilt are not usable Why would you do that?
And see, he kind of had to do that because of the fact. Now, before I say this, I want to preface this in saying I am not blaming the victims. I'm not blaming the victims' parents. This is just a truth point of the case. When Fred Goldman decided that he wanted to see OJ put away, he says it wasn't about money. But if you look at the civil suits and barring that, okay, now, before I go with that, here's some knowledge that maybe people don't know if you did not watch the OJ Lost Confession tape special. Christopher Darden looked like he was ready to throw up when this came out because he didn't know that this particular interview tape was shot back then. And even he stated that if I knew this was here, there would have been nothing stopping me from putting this into evidence. He would have went to Fred Goldman and said, if there's anything that's going to bar us from putting this in, you need to knock that off. But because that book called If I Did It was banned, that whole interview was around that. So now OJ got away, in my belief, he got away with that because we could not see that tape. That would have been evidence. Jury would have had to see it and would have heard some of the things that he was saying on that tape. Now, you watched the episode, right?
The confession tape episode? Yeah, I did.
So what did you think about the confession tape episode? How do you feel that it went? Did you feel that OJ pretty much was confessing? How did you feel?
I felt like the entire hypothetical thing, I thought it was completely fake. It's not hypothetical. Like, he did it. Like, what he was saying in that interview, it was definitely a confession, in my opinion. I don't feel like it was hypothetical. I felt like he would start in the third person and then revert to first person. And when he reverted from third person to first person, it was so eerie and scary, and you could tell that he was reliving everything he was talking about.
Right, like he kind of like zoned out a couple of times, right? Just like he was just looking in the air like he was having a good time talking about this.
Right, and there was so much weird smirking, and I have had people that have also watched this, friends of mine, that have said, well, maybe he was just nervous, like an anxiety thing. And as someone that has anxiety that tends to come out at the worst possible times, where I have, bust out laughing in the middle of a funeral before because I don't know how to process my emotions, it was a whole different thing for me. You know what I mean? Like, I've watched interviews with people where you can tell they have some kind of anxiety disorder. Like, they don't really want to be where they're at, but they feel like it needs to be talked about. They feel like their side needs to come out. And with OJ's confession tapes, it just didn't feel like that to me. It literally felt like I was watching someone confess to a crime, and he was reliving it, and he was enjoying the reel of memories that were coming back to him.
Well, I mean, the thing that points to his guilt for me, I'm sorry, maybe I'm just being too judgmental, but the whole opening of that, I'm like, all right, so he gonna just come on and say that? He's like, I'm gonna tell you a story that only I can tell you because only I was there and I know it. So when you preface something like that, right, to me, you're saying, I'm about to tell you a whole lot of stuff that you probably already know, but I'm gonna confess to that right now. The other thing of that was, like you said, he kept saying, well, let's just make sure this is hypothetical. So when it comes to the hypothetical, that comes to the title of the book. So it has come out that the book was actually supposed to be titled, I Did It, A Hypothetical Account If I Committed the Murder. That was supposed to be the actual name of the book. But when Fred Goldman got a hold of it and put that injunction on it, because the judge gave him the rights to the book, okay, so every dime that you spent, if you bought the book, it went to the Goldman camp, okay, he was able to change the name of the book to If I Did It, Confessions of a Killer. So because he believed that OJ did it. So that's how the names of the book came. But even the interviewer, I can't think of her name right now, but the lady that interviewed him back then, she was saying that they didn't pry on him too hard because OJ wanted to leave the interview the moment he got there. So when they asked her, well, why didn't you go deep diving and ask these questions about this and that? She was like, well, he wanted to leave the moment he got there. So I didn't want to push him too hard and hoping that he would tell me some stuff I didn't already know, which he did. So the other part of this case was very very racial. Okay, so you had a lot of African Americans that said OJ didn't do it and he was being ran down by the white man. You had a lot of white people saying, well, we know he did it. So here is an interesting fact. According to a 2016 poll, did you know that 83% of white Americans and 57% of black Americans felt that OJ was guilty? I was one of those 57% black Americans who felt OJ was guilty.
Me too.
There is so much stuff that came out, right? I mean, for a minute, let's talk about Shapiro. Now, you do know that they are saying that Kardashian, that Robert Kardashian pretty much was covering for him because they say that he switched his bags. Do you feel like that's possible? Maybe Kardashian being the friend that he was with OJ at the time. Do you think maybe he kind of helped him out a little bit?
I think that is very possible. I also think that it's very possible that not only did the switching of the bags happen, sorry, it's kind of going in another direction, but I also saw a special on ID Discovery about OJ Simpson where they dug into it. They dug into it to see if it was even possible for him to have committed the murders at all, right? And in that, they were saying that it was possible that there was more than one person. So while I do think that it's very possible that Robert Kardashian switched the bags because they were incredibly close. You know what I mean? Like they were close enough that it is very possible that Kardashian helped OJ. It's very possible. But I also think that it could be possible that there was more than one person, like that it wasn't just OJ. Now, I do believe that OJ was there. He just knows or seems to know too much. There are things that he said in those confession tapes that, and mind you, I've never read the book. So the only thing I can go off of is the confession tapes. But that was out of his own mouth. So there are just things that he says that seem like things that you wouldn't know unless you were actually present. They're not, or somebody relived it for you. You know what I mean?
Well, here's kind of the reason why I have an issue believing that there was a second person. Now, see if you can follow this theory with me. For one, on his confession tapes, he keeps talking about a dude named Charlie. Okay, so supposedly Charlie got the knife, but then right in the middle of that, he switched back to the first person, right? So it went from Charlie to I got the knife. I saw this guy coming at me, so I went and stabbed him. Now, just in my belief, if you have more than one person committing a crime, somebody's going to make a mistake. Now, let's remember that there was no footprints, there was no fingerprints, there was no trail of any kind of DNA evidence laying around that belonged to OJ or anybody else. So I think that if you had a second person, somebody's going to get nervous. There's going to be a footprint left somewhere. Somebody's going to forget that they don't have a glove on. They're going to touch a knife, something. If you look at the way he describes that, it seems like that he's just the 100% mastermind behind all of that. And then the coldest part of it is after he did these things, he went into his house and he took a shower. Now, remember, he already put his baggage down in front of the door because he was supposed to be going to Chicago, I believe, for some kind of golf tournament that was for celebrities. So he had already had this all staged. Went in like nothing happened, took a shower, and he had his limousine driver call him when he got there, and the limousine guy didn't even come into the gate. He just walked out and got in the car, and that was it. That becomes the perfect alibi. So that's why I kind of have a problem believing that there was a second person. What do you think about that? Do you think that's possible? Do you still have the same theory that maybe there was 2 or 3 people that could have done this?
When you lay the theory out like that, I could see where there couldn't be a second person because you're right. There was no mistake made. You know what I mean? You're right. If there was a second person, they would either had to have been extremely careful, right, to the point that they left no DNA behind, or that second person probably would have messed up somewhere. Because I mean, there's nothing to tie OJ, or then during his trial, there was nothing to tie OJ to the murder, other than the fact that Nicole was his ex-wife.
So let's talk about the biggest line of this case that still lives on to this day. The one thing that everybody feels that got OJ off, and that is if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. So before I tell you what Robert Shapiro said, because I just watched an interview that Robert Shapiro did not long ago. It was on YouTube. Before I tell you what he said, let's examine this. So there was a bloody glove or glove that was there that supposedly set out in the sun. Now, if you know anything about OJ was really big into expensive leather gloves. This is a pair of expensive leather gloves. So they're saying that because the glove set out in the sun, of course, it would not fit his hand if he went to put it on because it shrunk. Now, we must also keep in mind, if you don't know the case very well, is that OJ also was on some type of blood pressure medicine that if he did not take this blood pressure medicine, it would cause his hands to swell, sometimes to double the size of what they naturally are. So what do you feel about the if it don't fit, you must have quit? Do you think the glove naturally didn't fit? Is it because of the sun? Do you think that Johnny Cochran was smart by playing this card and that that was the most serious blow that he dealt to the prosecution in the whole case?
Cochran was smart, I guess. I can give him that. But I think that the whole, if it does not fit, you must have quit thing, I thought that was the stupidest part of the whole case. To be honest, I absolutely hate that line. Like, just when you said the words, if it does not fit, you must have quit, I cringed because I absolutely thought that was ridiculous. Because, like you said, if it's sitting out in the sun, theoretically, it would shrink, right? Also, there was no murder weapon found, correct?
Right. The murder weapon was never recovered, as far as I believe.
So, here's the deal. First of all, there was no murder weapon found. Second of all, the sun is a factor with the leather because even if you have a genuine leather handbag, if you let it sit out in the sun, it's going to get messed up. You know what I'm saying? So it's very possible that happened. On top of, I'm sure that Cochran knew that if OJ didn't take his blood pressure medication, that his hands would swell. It wouldn't have been that hard for him to say, hey, OJ, you're going to court and I plan on, using this as part of our defense. So don't take your blood pressure medication because, we'll monitor it, but don't take it because your hands could swell. You know what I mean? Like, I don't believe that he didn't think of that.
Well, then also, let's remember, since this glove was evidence, OJ had to wear a plastic glove over his hand to even try the glove on.
Right. So not only are his hands possibly swelled, we don't have any proof, okay, that his hands are swelled. So I'm saying possibly, because I really don't believe that Cochran wasn't smart enough to know that could be a way, right? But then he has another glove over his hand and then goes to put this leather glove on over his hand. Okay. So leather gloves tend to be form-fitting, right? They're not, unless you buy them too big on purpose, they're not going to be too big. They're going to fit your hand the way they're supposed to. So
right.
If you're trying to put a genuine, expensive, probably fitted leather glove over a hand that has a latex glove already over it, it's not going to fit. So how are you going to acquit somebody just because a glove doesn't fit that's been sitting out in the elements?
Right. Now, here's something to blow your mind if you have not seen this yet. This was very intriguing to me. So I did watch an interview a couple of days ago with Robert Shapiro. Now, this kind of adds a little bit to this whole glove thing once he said it. So remember now, everybody, it's been, 20, 30 years, everybody's hands is free to talk about this case openly, and there is no attorney-client privilege rule anymore because OJ was acquitted of the crime. So in this interview, they asked Robert Shapiro about the glove. Here's exactly what he said. He said, I knew the glove was not going to fit OJ's hands because of what I instructed OJ to do. So he told OJ, he goes, I know that they're going to bring in this glove and they're expecting it to fit. So what I want you to do is I want you to put this glove on your hand and I want you to spread your fingers as wide as they will go. And I want you to tug the hell out of this glove. It's not going to fit. This came out of Robert Shapiro's own mouth. He also stated that he had heard and believed that OJ confessed that he did commit the murders to Rosie Greer. For those of you guys who don't know who Rosie Greer is, he's a Christian minister now, but he too was a very, very great, excellent football player in the NFL. Big Rosie Greer. They call him Big Rosie. But he had confessed to Rosie Greer saying, yeah, that he had committed these murders. Christopher Darden to this day is still sick because they were the ones that allowed this glove in, right? He said he felt that once the glove came in and it fit OJ's hand, that was it, that there would be an automatic acquittal and it would be over. He didn't think about the elements of the son or maybe that he was on medication. But his attorneys helped him a great deal get past that glove bit. So let's talk about the other elephant in the room, though, that kind of tanked the prosecution's case a little bit. And that has to deal with Furman, the police officer who got on the stand that decided that he liked to drop the N-word. I think that was a big turning point, too, because they were already playing the race card in OJ's case, pretty much saying that he was the Jews. Of course, he was a famous black man married to a white woman. Of course, that they were going to try to pin this on him. And then when Furman gets on the case and he's just obliterating, just scathing racist, do you think that had anything to do with the case, or do you think the case would have had the same outcome even if Furman did not testify?
It's a loaded question for me, honestly, because while I do truly believe that the fact that Furman is his name went up on the stand and it, obviously shown that he was a racist, that definitely, it's like every action has a reaction and a consequence. Okay. And the consequence for this was that he is obviously a racist. So that just furthers everyone's proof, if you will, that people are just trying to frame OJ Simpson. Okay. Now, I don't believe for a second that OJ Simpson did not do this. Like, I believe 100% that he did it. But I can also see how a cop that is a lead on a case like this calling the main suspect the N-word could look terrible and could really make your case non-existent.
And let's kind of remember back in those times too, there was a lot of issues with blacks in the LAPD. I mean, that's just how it is. A lot of black people didn't trust LAPD. There was a lot of calls that was heard from cops saying, we're going to get the N-word tonight and the N's going to jail. So right. This case kind of happened at, a time where this was at the height of everything. And even though we do have a black man that's 100% in my view guilty, I agree with Steve Harvey. When Steve Harvey had Cuba Gooding Jr. on his show because he had portrayed OJ in the People versus OJ Simpson American Crime Story, I agree with him. He said, I believe OJ killed everybody in there. There's no way that you couldn't. I mean, if you look around, I mean, there's just no way that he ain't guilty. But I think the prosecution kind of helped push him out of that whole entire situation because of that. Now, Christopher Darden swears that he knew who Mark Furman was. He also swears that he knew that Mark Furman was a racist. In my opinion, I don't know if I believe Chris, because the fact that if I was a prosecutor and I want this brother to go to jail, I'm not going to put anybody on my stand that I know for a fact can take my case. So I think that's just him trying to save face a little bit. Also, keep in mind that this one case ruined a lot of careers, right? Christopher Darden quit. He wrote a book, which I do have about the case. Marsha Clark quit. She now has a successful show on ID, but she walked away from being a prosecutor. They said that they felt like that they failed. I know you haven't, but I have read the book. I actually own the book if I did it. And if you read this book, there is no doubt in your mind that OJ did this crime. Just reading it, I can see him sitting on his couch with a notepad and grinning ear to ear about everything that he's writing down, because not only does he feel like he can get away with it, but he did.
Honestly, I don't even know if I want to read the book. As bad as that sounds, because I watched that The Lost Confession. Just watching him, I literally cried. Like, there were parts of it where I was so upset and just so like disturbed by what this man was saying. In my head, I was like, if y'all had allowed this, if this was allowed to be shown in a court, there's no way that he would have gotten acquitted. Even with that stupid tagline of, if it does not fit, you must acquit. I think that would have been thrown right out the window. If something like this had been able to be entered into evidence, that defense wouldn't have worked. It just wouldn't have. And that confession tape is just one of the many things to me that is why he didn't get put away forever. Because I mean, on top of Furman with his terrible racism, on top of OJ Simpson is the juice. You know what I mean? Like, there are so many factors that led to his acquittal, because I mean, we can't lie when, you know, it's not a lie when you say that celebrities tend to get a lesser punishment for things, right? So money talks when you are in a court of law, unfortunately. And I don't think that he may not have been put away 25 to life for first degree murder. He might have gotten a lesser sentence, but I think that there were definitely things that could have been done to seal the deal for him to at least serve something for the murders of Nicole and Ron. I feel like something in the justice system was wrong. And there are a lot of people that think that he didn't do it. There are a lot of people that think that maybe he wasn't there when it happened, but he hired somebody to do it.
You ever tell you one of the things that it was? You'll never get anyone that investigated this case or prosecutions to admit this, but it's true. And if you think about it, you know it's true because Cochran did try to hone in on the race card. LA was scared of a riot. Okay, I think there had been several other cases that had took place where some people was acquitted for doing something to black people. A riot broke out. They reminiscing of the Watts riot. They were afraid of a riot. If you look at that day and time of what was going on and how many people lined outside of the courthouse. Okay, I ain't trying to run down my people, but we do not show our anger very well. So just go back and think about all the people that lined the bridges going down the 5 freeway in LA. And I didn't even live in LA at this time. I lived in Minnesota. And when I saw this, I'm sitting here as I drive on the 5 all the time. I'm like, man, this is where everybody was standing here talking about free OJ, right? So think about all those hundreds of people that was there. Think about all the thousands of people that's at the courtroom. And then think about now you have this beloved figure, because that's exactly what he was at the time. Because of what African-Americans felt that he did for the community, which I'm not going to lie, he did a lot for the African-American community when it came to football. Does that still mean that he should not go to jail for murder? No, but that's how a lot of people, my skin tone and yours, was looking at this, right? He's done so much for the African-American community. You're just trying to persecute a man. I do believe that if he was found guilty, there would have been a riot that you've never seen the likes of before downtown LA that day. And I think that that's one thing that they were kind of afraid of. The other thing is I do believe that the jury did not have enough evidence to convict him based on what the prosecution allowed in. And this is why Christopher Darden and Marsha Clark gave up their career, because they said they failed. There was a couple of those things I don't think if they put in there, OJ would be sitting behind bars right now. And I do think they would have gave him life, because think about it, it's 2 people you just brutally murdered and just left there. So here is, if you haven't seen, anybody who's listening, if you guys have not seen the Lost Confession tapes, we urge you to download the app, go to Fox. It was on Fox, and watch that. Before we close off this particular segment of it, we got one more part of OJ to talk about. The Rolling Stone had wrote up a thing called the 5 WTF moments from that. Here they are. It says, Simpson said that though Nicole and Goldman were physically dead, they had essentially killed him too. The second was Simpson's friend Charlie was the one who alerted him to go to Nicole's house that day. Because he had said that Charlie said, man, you need to go by Nicole's house. I don't know what's going on. He talked about blood and stuff that was at the scene of the crime and laughingly reminded Regan that he was speaking in hypotheticals, which he did a lot through that whole entire thing. He would like kind of go back to first person and go, but remember though, this is hypothetical.
It's hypothetical.
Right.
And that was so, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry. But that was so gross to me. Like, it literally made me feel so gross every time he did that. Because how are you going to switch to first person and then snap out of it and come back and be like, oh, but it's hypothetical. Don't forget, it's hypothetical. And then he'd be like, and then he would do like, he'd go, I swear to you, this is all hypothetical. And I can't laugh like OJ does, like, thank God, because I don't want to laugh like that. But he would say it and then he would laugh. Like, he would like full body belly laugh. Like, it's just a hilarious, completely hilarious joke. And he would just laugh so hard and, oh, it's hypothetical. It's hypothetical. Like, who are you trying to convince though? Like, are you trying to convince the viewers or are you trying to convince yourself?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. And then there's in the fourth one said that time Simpson used verb tenses that sounded more definitive than speculative. And here is the biggest one why I believe that Kardashian did help him. He described in excruciating detail the process of getting rid of the evidence. If you remember watching that, she asked him, well, what did you do? What happened to the clothes? And he said that he gave the clothes to Charlie because somebody had to get rid of the bloody clothes. He also stated that there is no way that anybody could be killed in that nature without everybody having blood on them. To me, that just says, okay, you did it, because you're telling us everybody, including you, had blood on you, and you gave the clothes to Charlie, aka yourself, to get rid of them. So that's what was in that bag when he flew to Chicago. I think there was a conversation that had been had once he found out once they told him Nicole had been killed. And I think there was a conversation they had with Kardashian. That's why Kardashian was there on his premises at the exact time that OJ came back from the airport from coming back in town and swapped out that bag. So anything else you want to say about his murder case, Geneva, on that one?
Just that I think he's guilty as sin. That's it. Like, I'm sorry. Like, with this one, we definitely agreed that he's guilty, but I definitely feel that OJ Simpson is guilty. I don't feel like he hired anyone, like a hitman or anything like that. I definitely feel that he was there. And while we may never have the answers to these murders at this point, I don't know how you could watch the confession and not believe that he's innocent. I mean, and believe that he's innocent and not believe that he's guilty. That's what I meant.
Now, most people, though, at this point would figure, man, I got away with the biggest crime in the world. I'm just going to stop, lay low, go play some golf, go to Hawaii, do something. No, not OJ. So now we come to September of 2007, where he goes into a room that he let a group of men into at the Palace Station Hotel because he heard that somebody had stole a bunch of his memorabilia that belonged to him. Now, the way I look at this point, he went to jail for 33 years in prison. Now, here's how I kind of feel. Now, you can disagree, but this is how I feel. I feel that once again, OJ has not put himself in the spotlight when it comes to the police and the justice system. Everybody is still pretty mad, right, that he got off with murder as it is. The Goldmans is looking for any reason to be able to lock OJ up, even though they know they'll never get him on murder. So I think that this was the biggest stupidity moment that OJ ever had, because you should already know you're going to go to jail. I feel like the judges was tainted with that. I feel like it was, we couldn't get OJ in jail for the murder. We can put him in jail for this. Even after the guy who he held up testified and said that he didn't feel that OJ should go to jail for 33 years because he even said that OJ wasn't the one brandishing the weapons and he never hurt him. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like they used this case to kind of put him in jail, at least for a little bit of what he didn't get from the criminal case? Or do you think that that no one thought about that at all?
I think that they may have used this case to try to get him in jail for a minute, because there's a what is that called? The double jeopardy or whatever that is, where you can't try
Right.
someone for the same crime twice. So
Twice,
even
correct.
if they found evidence on OJ Simpson that he did these murders, there's no way for them to retry him for the murders. So he slipped up and he, broke into somebody's house and did what he did, trying to steal things for God knows what reason. And then they were like, oh, well, now we can get him because this case we have proof for. We have, definite proof. There shouldn't be any kind of a, there should be no shadow of a doubt or anything that would sway a jury to say that, oh no, maybe he didn't really do it. Maybe it was somebody else, type of a thing. And so they used that. But I definitely think that as infamous as he became for the fact that people were so divided about whether OJ committed the murders or didn't, that they definitely used that case during the process of trying the armed robbery case.
Right. Because at the point that it was, even if he lived that long, he was still going to be getting out of jail again. So he was never going to go away for life. The justice that needed to be had for Nicole and for Ron was never going to happen. I mean, it's never going to happen now. So in closing, here's my thoughts. I think that OJ is 129,000% guilty. I believe the man should have went to jail for the rest of his natural born life. He had multiple incidents with his temper. There was a video that had been released during the trial that the jury was not allowed to see, which is a workout video that he had made. And he did make a reference that when I just get mad, I punch my wife in the face. I do not think that he is a very decent human being. So on this case, there is going to be no argument between me and Geneva because I do, and I always have. And I was really young when this case came about. I was somewhere around 1920. And I've always believed since that time till now that he is guilty as all sin. What's your final thoughts on that, Geneva?
Well, obviously, I did not watch this case on the news because this was in 1994 and I was like 2 years old. So, because I was born in 91, but I'm pretty sure that this happened before my birthday in November of 94. So I wouldn't have even turned 3 years old yet. But as, growing up, I have done my research on OJ Simpson because I do remember the second case, the armed robbery. I do remember seeing that on the news. And then they did bring up, there were things that were brought up about the murders. So definitely I looked into that after I had watched that. I do believe that OJ Simpson is guilty. I do believe that he did orchestrate and carry out the murders of Nicole and Ron, both. I think that there is plenty of evidence against him for domestic violence, for being overly aggressive. They had phone calls made to the cops from their house or from their residence more than once. After they were split up even, there was, I know for sure, a phone call made by Nicole to the police basically saying that OJ was in the house refusing to leave and she was afraid that he was going to wake up all of the children. That is one of them that I do remember seeing and listening to while, in my research of this case. So I definitely do agree with you when you say that OJ Simpson was guilty of murder. Obviously, he can never be tried for this ever again. He will never serve any time for it. I'm not victim blaming or blaming the parents because grief does crazy things to people. But I do think that there were things that Ron Goldman's father did that definitely hindered a guilty verdict. And I also believe that the fact that one of the lead cops in this case was racist and decided it was appropriate to be heard dropping the N-word. So I definitely think that was another issue with not getting him convicted for the murders. But at the same time, I am glad that eventually he slipped up and he served some kind of time, not the amount of time that he deserved, but he did serve some time for, I think, 9 years for the armed robbery. So
9 years to 33. Yeah, he got paroled on that.
And now he's on parole. So he's probably never going to be 100% free, because even when you're on parole, you're not free. You know what I mean? You still got to go and check in with the state and do whatever the state says. I don't know what the laws for where he is are when it comes to parole, but he's got to do some kind of a check-in or a follow-up, at least probably every month. So at least he's being held accountable for the armed robbery, which there's no way for him to have not been, because he was caught there red-handed. But at least he served some time, even if it wasn't the time that he deserved.
Right. So with me right to end this segment without saying that our hearts do go out to Nicole Brown's family as well as Ron Goldman's family. We, again, in no way meant to or wanted to abolish any memories or to victim blame or shame anybody. Well, I do know firsthand that grief has its way of doing things to people. And maybe at the time that some of these civil suits was going on, maybe Fred Goldman felt that this was the best way to keep the case in the spotlight, as well as try to get at least an ounce of justice for his son. All right, everybody, I hope that you enjoyed that one. Looking back in history at what my very first case was. Since that time now, I have about 300 episodes plus under my belt, and I really enjoyed doing this. So it was kind of cool for you guys to hear where I started. Now, some things on this case. Before I give you my statements, I'll say it again like I did in the episode. I am not trying to victim shame or shame the Goldman family or anybody else. The opinions I have is my own, and I think some people do agree with me. Maybe they do now at this point. So to kind of fill you in what's gone on after this case. So if you're marking time, 1994 is when this trial began. That was about 30 years ago. They always say that there's certain events that takes place that you never forget where you were at the time that it happened. I can tell you that I was 22 years old. I lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the time, and I worked for a videotape store that was family owned. I was at work on the day that this trial began, and they had a TV that was up on one of the soda machines. So I was watching the trial while I was there. Had no intention of moving to LA at that time. Didn't know nothing about LA. Just knew some things that had taken place here prior to the OJ Simpson case. So when I first watched this case, my first thoughts was there was no way that this guy was walking away from this case. Even though I was one of the few black people at the time, I believe that OJ Simpson was guilty, just the circumstances of the case, knowing a little bit about OJ's history, kind of proved that to be that it was him. This case destroyed not only families, but careers. And I'm going to tell you, in my opinion, and I think I did say it through the episode, exactly what I think happened and why OJ Simpson was acquitted. The prosecution made some very, very big errors. And I think since then, Christopher Darden and Marsha Clark has even said that they had made several mistakes during the case that they felt got OJ off. One of them was introducing the glove. I would have never introduced that glove as a prosecutor just because of the known things that the glove had already been through. It was supposedly out in the sun. It baked in the sun. It had dry blood on it. This was going to make this glove not fit even if they wanted it to. I still believe that even if OJ was not coached to stretch his hand out and, tug on the glove, I don't think it would have fit properly because of that. On top of that, you have to wear a protective lining. So they had a plastic glove because it was evidence. All of that right there shot that case. That's number one. Number two, you put Furman on the stand. There's no way you put Mark Furman on this stand. He's a racist cop. You have a black guy on trial for murder who is accused of murdering two white people. And his defense has already played the race card on this since the beginning. The black attorneys as well as the white, right? Because Kardashian even went along with the same thing. Shapiro, same thing. Cochran, same thing. So they all got together, was playing this race card that the LAPD was out to get another black man because he was famous. Now you put Mark Furman on the stand, who we can prove has been dropping the N-word like the son of man. Well, you kind of sink that case. The other thing that kind of sunk the case, and I mean this with all due respect because I've had this thought for a long time, and I said it on the episode, was when the Goldman family went and decided that they wanted to have If I Did It as their own. When Fred Goldman wanted that book to be his, he wanted all the rights taken away from OJ, he wanted to own it. Well, that locked out a whole bunch of evidence that could have been used, like we discussed. If you ever read If I Did It, Confessions of the Killer, you would know what I'm talking about. We covered in the episode. There were so many things that OJ said and did at that time that if we could have had all of that information, I just don't believe that there's no way OJ Simpson would have walked away from it. Every word in that book, no matter who owns it or who has the rights or who's getting the money for it, is 100% OJ's. I actually watched the thing with him talking about he punches his wife in practice as a joke, quote unquote, when he was doing some exercise video. So I believe that that also hindered that case. If we would have heard everything that was in that book, and if we would have heard the lost confessions, that's what they called them because they couldn't air them at that time, because once the judge sold the book or gave it to Fred Goldman, he put a gag on it and said, none of this can be used at this point. So at this point, we don't hear any of these things after the trial. Everything in those lost confession tape videos that you could see, I think still somewhere floating on the internet, was damning. And like Christopher Darden did say, he did state that if he knew all that stuff was out there, he would have done everything in his power to put that in the evidence. And I still believe to this day, he would have went to Fred Goldman and the Goldman family and say, hey, look, I understand. You don't want this guy to benefit from anything that pertains to the death of your son. I get it. But if you do this deal right now while we're in the middle of all of this, it's going to hinder what I can put in and it's going to let him off. I think if that would have been the conversation, we would have had a different outcome. So as you all know, OJ walked free. What has happened in the 30 years since OJ went free? Well, as we stated in 2007, 2008, he went to jail because he decided he was going to go and commit a robbery to get back his stuff that he said somebody stole from him. Even though the guy who was the victim said, please don't put him in jail, they did give him 33 years. But he had the chance to get parole after 9 years, which he was. He had a lot of people that wrote him letters and so on and so forth for his parole hearings, and they think he should get out. So OJ was released after just serving 9 years on a 33-year sentence. Of course, as we know, he never have and he could never serve any time for the murder of Ron Goldman and Nicole Simpson, because in America, it's a one-shot deal. If you go on trial for murder and you are acquitted, that's it. He could jumped up after the minute that they said OJ Simpson is innocent. Let me just show you how ridiculous this is for those who don't live in America, just how quick that it is. The moment that they said OJ Simpson was found not guilty of murdering Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson, he could have jumped up on the table and said, all y'all some idiots. I did it. I killed everybody in that house. And guess what? Ain't nothing you can do to me now because the jury's already found me not guilty. That's how the double jeopardy law works. Of course, he has never done that. He's also always said that he was innocent, which I believe that he is not. The careers of Christopher Darden and Marsha Clark was pretty much destroyed when it comes to being a prosecutor. Marsha Clark did hang up being a prosecutor after the OJ Simpson trial. She always felt that she had failed, and she also said that during the trial, the things from the media that she received was the actual real hell of the trial. Marsha Clark has went on now, and she's become an author. She actually did write a book called Without a Doubt, which is about her time in the OJ Simpson trial. And then she's written several other books since then. So she's given up practicing law at this point. She did have her own show for a little bit on ID Discovery, and then that ended up going away too as well, I believe. I did watch a couple episodes of that. Christopher Darden, same thing. he walked away from being a lawyer or a prosecutor after the OJ Simpson trial. Because again, this was the trial that sunk everybody. He felt like that he had let the families down and there was no way this guy should have walked free. So he hung it up. He had became a legal commentator for CNBC, CNN, Court TV for a little bit. He also did a little bit of acting. He made a couple of guest appearances on shows like Touched by an Angel, Girlfriends, The Tonight Show with Johnny Cochran. He also did write a book, which was called In Contempt, I believe was the name of the book. I do have that book here. And then he also co-authored a number of other crime novels, which includes The Trials of Nikki Hill and L.A. Justice and The Last Defense, along with Dick Lochte. So, like I said, it seems like prosecutors and actors, they all become authors because they have so many stories to tell. And on top of all of that, apparently Christopher Darden is some type of politician now, because a little while ago, I got a text message on my phone that said that he was running for some office down here in California, and he wanted to know if he had my support. So that's what happened to Christopher Darden and Marsha Clark. Now, on top of that, the Goldman family is still to this day trying to get justice for their son any way that they can. They still do talk about what has went on with him and, you know, what's happening with the case, and that they hope that something can be done, even though we know that it can't. So the only thing that they can do is continue to talk about it in the media and to do interviews and stuff of that nature to get it out there. And then what happened to OJ Simpson? Well, if you've been listening to the news recently, we found out that OJ Simpson just passed away. OJ died April 10th, 2024. He was 76 years old, and I believe he passed away in his Las Vegas home. His children, all of them that was in tow at that time, did confirm that he had passed away. I really wish he would have left some type of confession behind, something saying he did it, didn't do it, whatever, because now, of course, there's a whole lot of conspiracies that is now coming out of the woodwork now that OJ has passed away. He's got friends coming out saying that he confessed that he did the murders to them. He's got other people saying that he told them that he hired the mob boss of some mob to come kill Nicole. I mean, it's getting ridiculous. The one thing I do believe is that he took it to his grave, and I will always, always believe that OJ Simpson did commit those murders. And lastly, when it comes to Johnny Cochran and his famous saying, which my daughter has said many times that she hates. So Johnny Cochran also passed away since this trial. He died March 29th of 2005 here in Los Angeles. And the "if it don't fit, you must acquit," in my opinion, was one of the most brilliant statements ever in a courtroom battle. And here is why. You always want something to stick with the jury. I've sat on several of them, especially being that he is the defense. The defense don't get as many opportunities as the prosecutor does. The prosecution always gets the last word. So you always want something to go along with the visual, especially if it's a visual that you know should never leave the consciousness of the jury. And when OJ tried to put on that glove and that glove did not fit, that was the image that needed to be sealed in the jury's memory. And if it don't fit, you must acquit, just drove it home. I'm always willing to bet that that statement and that vision of that glove haunted the jury up until the time they deliberated and found him not guilty. So I think it was a brilliant statement. It's been used since then. Everybody's joked about it. There's been a lot of comedy shows that's put that in there. Johnny Cochran, up until his death, even appeared in a couple of TV shows playing himself. So in my opinion, if it don't fit, you must acquit was one of the blockbuster statements of any trial I've ever seen. All right, so I hope that you guys enjoyed this one. I thank you for tuning in. Wanted to get this one out to you because the fact that the iron is hot since OJ just passed away, everything's back in the news. I would keep an eye on everything if I was you guys, if you don't know what's going on, because this is far from done, especially now that he has passed away. There's talk about the settlement that he never paid to the Goldmans and things of that nature. And I'm sure that you will see the Goldmans in the news here quite a bit. So keep your eye out for that. All right, coming at you next week, we have author Max Marshall. He is the author of a book called Among the Bros. He graduated summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa in 2016, and this book exposes kind of the underbelly of what happens in fraternities. You don't want to miss that. And then, from our extraordinary person, we have Joanne Fawcett. She dramatically changed her life after she was divorced several times, death in the family, being a prison wife. Out of all of that, she found strength and gifts of inner power. You definitely don't want to miss the conversation that we've had around her life, as well as her amazing memoir entitled Midnight Magic. You don't want to miss those. So once again, Max Marshall is the author next week, followed by Joanne Fawcett. And don't forget, your new day of episodes dropping from True Crime and Authors is a Saturday now. Mark your calendars for that day, and maybe you will get some sooner than that if I can see that I can make way to do so. I do know I owe you guys a couple of episodes that are bonus episodes as far as outcomes of what happened in my court case with my neighbor and what happened with my son at school. Those, I promise you, will be coming out soon. Keep your ear out for those. And also, don't forget, if you want to help support the show, the link in the show notes for Buy Me a Coffee for as low as $1 to $5. You can help support the show. I always let you know where I'm going to be contractually. Don't forget that I will be at True Crime Fest, Fayetteville, Arkansas, August 2nd and 3rd, 2024. Links for your tickets, which are on sale now, can be found in the show notes. Thank you once again for joining me today. I know you have many choices in true crime and interview podcasts. I am grateful for the last almost 3 years you have chose me. Remember that you have been listening to the only refaceted podcast of its kind. Be good to yourself and each other, and always remember, always stay humbled. An act of kindness can make someone's day. A little love and compassion can go a long way. And remember that there is an extraordinary person in all of us. I'll catch you on the next one.
Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. Join us on social media. One link to the link tree has it all. Feel free to drop us a line at truecrimeandauthors@gmail.com. Cover art and logo designed by Arslan. Sound mixing and editing by David McClam. Intro script by Sophie Wild and David McClam. Theme music, Legendary, by New Alchemist. Introduction and ending credits by Jackie Voice. See you next time on True Crime, Authors, and Extraordinary People.